Gute Woche. A bisschen Gesundheit began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Yutes Teves. Today was 19 days in the month of Teves, one day before Chav Teves. Tonight is Chav Teves. Chav Teves is the Yortzeit of the Rambam. In general, we know regarding a Yortzeit, the Alter Rebbe writes in Igeras HaKodesh regarding the day of the Yortzeit that Kol Amoloi Asher Omloi Nafshoi, all the toil that a person has put in and all his good work while he was on this world. When it comes the day of Yortzeit, all of this has a special elevation, a special aliyah. So when we're talking about the day of the Yortzeit of the Rambam as well, which is tonight, this is the day when all the Avodah of the Rambam will have its aliyah. This is the day itself. Now today we are in the Shabbos, which is before this day, and we know the famous expression in the Zohar that Shabbos gives bracha to the entire week. So Shabbos naturally will also gives bracha to this special day, which is right after Shabbos, the day of the Yortzeit of the Rambam. Especially taking into consideration that this day is right away following Shabbos. From Shabbos we go right away into the day of Chav Teves. So here the Rebbe brought a halacha regarding, for example, if Rosh Chodesh should fall out on a Sunday. So when Rosh Chodesh falls out on a Sunday, Shabbos to Mincha, we don't say Tachnun anymore. We don't say Tzedkas Chotzedek. So what does this show? This shows that the tefillah, which we say Shabbos afternoon, already has a shaychus to Sunday. So now that we are already on Shabbos afternoon, so it's not just like a regular day in the week, which also Shabbos gives bracha to, but the Shabbos and the Sunday are much closer associated. Because from the Shabbos, we go right away into this special day, into the Sunday, which is the day of the Yortzeit of the Rambam. And as mentioned before, who writes this inyan regarding the specialty of a day of Yortzeit? That on the day of Yortzeit, all the toil of the person, all the energy he put into all this good work has its spiritual elevation. This the Alter Rebbe writes. And this week, it is also the Yortzeit of the Alter Rebbe. 24 days in Teves, Chav Dalet Teves, will be the Yortzeit of the Alter Rebbe. And the Rebbe said we began explaining how we find equivalence between the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe. From the Alter Rebbe, we all know that there's the Sefer the Likutei Torah. Now, Likutei Torah is Mamorim from the Alter Rebbe on the Chamoshim of Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Devar. The first two Chamoshim, it's called Torah Oyer, on Bereshis and Shemos. The second three Chamoshim, it's called Likutei Torah. Actually, what is it? It's a selection, both of them, Torah as well as Likutei Torah. They are both a selection of Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe, which were put together later years after the Alter Rebbe passed away. It was put together in a format of Mamorim on the weekly Seder. There is a letter from the Frierdiker Rebbe, where the Frierdiker Rebbe describes at length why both of these Svarim don't have the same name. If Torah is on Bereshis and Shemos, then obviously the same name should have been on the other part which has Mamorim on the rest of the Chamoshim. And nonetheless we see that this is called Torah and this is called Likutei Torah. The Rebbe there gives historic reasons why it is so. He explains that it had to, in those days in Russia there was a census, and they didn't allow you to print every sefer which you had to print. You had to get a special permit from them. And it seems like obviously there was some technical reasons why they wanted to keep it away from them, that this is a continuation to the previous sefer, and that's why they applied as if it would be a sefer in itself. There's a whole letter from the Frierdiker Rebbe where he describes it at length. But regardless, the name of the sefer, which has the Mamorim on Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Devarim, is Likutei Torah. What is the title Likutei Torah? Likutei means a gathering. You gather words from here and from there, you put things together, and in such a way you form the sefer. So obviously one may think that this is not the real essence of the Sefer. In other words, this is not the real... Why? Because all you have done is you've gathered a bit from here, and you've gathered a bit from there, you've put pieces together, and this is how you got the Sefer together. Which is really not the ideal chshivas, not the ideal prestige which we want from a Sefer. We want a Sefer should be original inyan. But the truth is that the Tanya is also called Likutei Amorim. It's a gathering. Likut means a gathering, put together. Put together, Amorim, which means sayings, quotations. And if we look up, where did the Alter Rebbe take it from? Especially now that we have access to Svarim from the Maggid and from the Baal Shem Tov, we will see that these are Svarim, these inyanim which the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, are explained in Svarim of the Maggid, they're explained in Svarim of the Baal Shem Tov. But nonetheless, when the Alter Rebbe put it together, the Alter Rebbe put it together in a way that, by illuminating it with the Torah of Chabad, which the Alter Rebbe instilled in the Tanya, we realize that it's not just a collection of essays, it's something which the Alter Rebbe added a lot to. The same when we're talking about Likutei Torah, it's not just a likut, meaning a collection, putting together in Yonim of Torah. And here the Rebbe mentioned that in the Likutei Torah, besides that it has Mamorim from the Alter Rebbe, which is the original inyan of the Sefer, it is related that the one who put together the Likutei Torah was the Tzemach Tzedek, Alter Rebbe's grandson. And it is related that when the Tzemach Tzedek was involved in editing the Likutei Torah, Chassidim asked him that besides the Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe, which will be in the Sefer, he should add things from his own as well. And it is known that the Tzemach Tzedek agreed to the request of Chassidim, and there's a tremendous amount added on in Likutei Torah in the middle of Mamorim and towards the end of Mamorim, notes, which these notes are from the Tzemach Tzedek. So there's also a tremendous richness in Torah, which the Tzemach Tzedek added. Though on one hand we call it Likutei, which means all it is, it's only a mere collection, but it's not just that. There's much more to it. It's a collection take, but the collection which has a tremendous amount of chassidus from the Tzemach Tzedek, which was added to it. Incidentally, in the Likutei Torah, whatever is in parentheses, this was added on by the Tzemach Tzedek. Whatever is not in parentheses, that's the original Maimah from the Alter Rebbe. The same the Rebbe is concluding regarding the Rambam. Even though we may think that the Rambam Sefer, and the primary Sefer of the Rambam, which is the Mishnah Torah, this is his main Sefer, which he wrote in Lashon HaKodesh. The Rambam wrote other Svarim, but the other Svarim that the Rambam wrote, he wrote them in Arabic. This is the only Sefer that the Rambam wrote in Lashon HaKodesh. He wrote the Sefer in Lashon HaKodesh. The Rebbe mentioned that he was begged that this Sefer should also be written in Arabic, and for some reason the Rambam refused, and this Sefer he wrote in its original text in Hebrew, and this is how we have the Sefer. Obviously, one may think that what is the contents of the Rambam Sefer? All it is, the Mishnah Torah, which we're talking about, all it is, it seems like it's a collection. He collected and put together and assembled all the halachas, and he put them together into a Sefer. But the truth is, it is not so. There's a tremendous, very, very deep and rich in Yonim and Torah, which we find in the Rambam, the way the Rambam composed the Sefer. So in other words, we shouldn't view the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, that all it is just a Sefer which compiles all the halachas. So one may say, what's so special about it? But the truth is, it is not so, even though it is Likutim. But as the Rambam himself writes, that one can gain the entire knowledge of Torah from learning this Sefer. One can go from learning of Chumash and go right away into this Sefer. And as we see Taka from the name it has. What is the name the Sefer has? Mishnah Torah. In other words, it's something which is a repeat of the entire Torah. And there are tremendous things and tremendous inyanim which the Rambam put into this Sefer in the way he set up the halachas and in all of the halachas, and which we can derive from the halachas, which are endless inyanim of Torah, which the Rambam has put into this Sefer. besides this Shabbos, being the Shabbos which is before Chav Teves, and besides it being the Shabbos which is before Chav Dalet Teves, as we just mentioned, there's another specialty in this Shabbos. And that is the fact that this is the Shabbos which is before the Siyum HaRambam. For those who learn Rambam 3 Prokim a day, they will be concluding the Rambam this week. So Mamela, this Shabbos gives bracha into this day as well. What is the whole inyan of Shabbos? It's explained in Chazal and at length explained in Hasidus that the whole idea of Shabbos is oineg, tainuk, pleasure. In other words, the idea of serving the Rebishter from a feeling of oineg. So when we say that Shabbos gives bracha into the entire week, that means that this plus, this advantage which Shabbos has, which is expressed through oineg, through pleasantness, Einig is a way of enjoying, a very pleasant way of enjoying. Now, naturally, besides its having its halachic ramifications, what we have to simply fulfill on Shabbos, so we have an Einig Shabbos. There is how it's explained in Chassidus, the spiritual side of it, which means the level of serving the Rebishter from a mood of Tainuk. This inyan of Tainuk, this is what Shabbos is all about. And this, when a Yid carries from Shabbos into the entire week, into the days of the week, he takes along this inyan of Einig with him into the entire week. Memela, when we're talking about the inyan of learning, and the Siyum HaRambam which will take place this week, it should all be in a way of tainuk. In other words, our learning should be in a way of pleasantness, in a way of enjoying the limud HaRambam, the learning of the Rambam. This Shabbos is Parsha Shemos. Regarding Shemos, we find in the Ramban, who is a commentary on Chumash. And while mentioning the Ramban, the Rebbe mentions that when the Rambam came out with his Sefer, with his Svarim, there were many that did not appreciate the Rambam. Not only did they not appreciate the Rambam, but much more than that, they came out against it. In the days of the Rambam, in those generations rather, it was the Ramban who stuck up very, very, very strongly and played a major role in defending the Rambam. So the Ramban, in his commentary on Chumash, which incidentally, his commentary on Chumash is, as he himself writes in his introduction to his commentary, that his Pirush is based on all the 4 levels of learning Torah. Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Soid, which these are the 4 ways one can learn an inyan in Torah. The commentary of the Ramban in Torah includes all of these 4 inyan. So, in this week's Sedra, in Parsha Shemos, he explains regarding the pasuk Shemos, which refers to the names of the Yidden, the names of the Shvatim, Ve'elu Shemos b'nei Yisrael. So he explains, brings in the concept, quoting from Chazal, Kol ha-Torah Shmoisav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the entire Torah is classified as the names of the Rebishter. Every word in Torah, every inyan in Torah, can be referred to that is the Rebishter's name. What is the inyan of a name? It's pshat, a name. So it's explained in Chassidus at length that on one side we see that a name is not so important. All a person uses a name is to be identified by the name. That means, in order that an outsider, second person, should be able to refer to him, that is why we need a name. But he himself, obviously, could get along without making use of his name. So this shows that the inyan of a name is something which is used for identification purposes. In other words, the person himself, as far as he himself is standing, the name does not play a major role. That's on one side. However, on the other end, Chassidus explains that we see that when a person faints and we want to awake him from his fainting, the best method to to get him awake is by referring to him by his name. What does this show us? This shows that the name is tied into his etzam hanefesh, to the essence of his soul. And that is why, even though he has fainted now, and he does not respond to any type of action which is going on around him, nonetheless, when he's called by his name, he does respond. Why? Because the name is tied in with his etzam hanefesh. The same when we're talking about Torah. We're explaining Torah as being Shemos of Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, name of the Rebishter. As the Rebbe mentioned, not just Tama name, but Shimcha HaGodel, the big name of the Rebishter. We say in Rebbe quoted, it's explained in Chassidus, we just said Chanukah, Lahodes u'Lahalel, to praise L'Shimcha HaGodel, to your big name. In other words, it's a yet in name itself, it's a yet higher madriga in shame. So when we're talking about Torah, Torah also goes into this category of Shemos of Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rebbe says, being a little more specific, in Torah we know that there are various parts of Torah. One of the parts of Torah is Halacha, Piskei Dinim, which this is actually what the Rambam is all about. When we're talking about Torah in the sense of a Sefer Halacha, the part of Halacha in Torah, so on one hand, where does a person have the real enjoyment of learning Torah? Where does one really see the real wisdom in learning Torah? And as I'll use the expression, the shakla v'tarya, the question and answers of learning Torah, this is not expressed in Halacha. Halacha is something which we have a clear-cut psak din. This and this is the halacha for so-and-so. This is this the halacha if the case would be such and such, and so forth. In the other parts of Torah, a person can have more of a gishmak in Torah. He can have much more of a taste in that. Why? Because the beauty of the wisdom in Torah, the shakla v'tarya which comes along in Torah, the being able to debate back and forth in Torah, which this is part of Torah, this is not expressed in the part of Halacha of Torah. On the other hand, where do we have the part where we literally fulfill the wish of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That is through the learning of Halacha. Because by us fulfilling Halacha, this is the wish and desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Kavanah Yoina. What is the intent of the Rebishter? After all of our learning of Torah, that is that we should practice it. How do we practice Torah? We practice Torah by learning Halachas. By being versed in Halachas, that's when we can practice Torah. If we don't know what to do, then we can't fulfill the wish of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How do we know what to do? We know through learning Torah. Through learning Torah, and what part of Torah? The part of Halacha. Zimamela, the part of Halacha that is being compared to the, especially, this is where we see in a very strong way how the Chelik Halacha of Torah is compared to shame, to a name. It was somewhere here in the Farbrengen, or later in the Farbrengen, in these siches where the Rebbe quoted an interesting medrash, that the medrash says that every day, we have 7 days in the week, so every day has a pair. We can tie one day together with another day. There's a couple. We could couple them up. The one day that doesn't have the pair is the 7th day. 6 days, we could divide 6 equally. 7, however, we can't divide equally. So Shabbos is left without a ben zug, without somebody to accompany him. So the Medrash says, who accompanies Shabbos? It's Torah. Torah and Shabbos become a couple, become a pair. Memela, the outcome of this is that this week we will be celebrating this inyan of learning Rambam. As the Rebbe expressed himself, from Pasha Shmois we are going into Pashas Ve'era. What is the inyan of Ve'era? Ve'era is an expression of vision. And the Rebbe says when a Yid will walk, a Yid will go, a Yid will walk, we will be able to identify him. It'll be noticeable on him that this is a Yid who is learning Shulchan Aruch, this is a Yid who is learning the Alter Rebbe's Likutei Torah, and this is a Yid that is learning Rambam. It'll be noticeable on the Yid. We'll be able to by looking on the person's face, we will be able to notice on him, we will be able to recognize on the person that this is a Yid who is involved in all of these inyan. It was in these sichas also that the Rebbe spoke about the inyan of Pidyon Shvuyim. Pidyon Shvuyim means that if somebody is a shavui, somebody who is captured, there's a mitzvah, it's explained in Svarim a lot, on the importance of releasing him, making sure that he is freed. Rebbe spoke that this inyan applies not only to a person, but the inyan applies to Svarim, and the inyan applies to chafetzim, to objects, especially what type of objects. When we're talking about an object that has holiness in it. What does it mean? In other words, chafetzim, objects which were used by tzaddikim, these chafetzim, these objects, such type of an object absorb the kedusha into it, and it remains eternally in the object. As I use the expression, kedusha loizaza mim kaima. When there's sanctity into something, it never moves, it always remains there. So obviously the Rebbe was referring to this, seems like the Rebbe was referring to the Svarim, which were released, which this is also an inyan of Pidyon Shvuyim. They were captured, captives, and they were nifted, they were released. The Rebbe also referred to what he has spoken about 2 weeks ago, that what is the most ideal way for us to celebrate this inyan when Svarim are released? The ideal way is to celebrate it by learning in the Svarim. The more we learn in a Sefer, this is the expression of joy. In other words, the Sefer itself. When is the Sefer happy? That we celebrate the Sefer's being released from being a shavui, from being a captive. That is when we learn from Svarim. And today the Rebbe also spoke very praising words of praise for those who are involved and were involved and are still involved in this inyan of Pidyon Shvuyim, and they are doing it with all of their heart, and they're into it fully. The Rebbe mentioned a story from the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek once sent an emissary to Petersburg to be involved in a special matter which Tzemach Tzedek got involved in. It was something of great importance. And he chose an emissary whom he sent, and he delegated him that he should act as his shliach in that specific issue. So Tzemach Tzedek was asked, how do you know that person, when he will be in Petersburg, how do you know that over there he will do everything according to your wish? I mean, when he's next to you, he can consult you and ask what you want, and based on what you want and your instructions, that's what he will do. But once he will be in Petersburg, you are here in Lubavitch, how will he be able to follow your instructions? The response to the Tzemach Tzedek was that if he was chosen to it, he's being given the koiches, the strength, so that even when he is there, he will definitely do the right thing, the things that are in line with his wish, with what he wants them to do. Same the Rebbe said regarding the individuals that are involved in the inyan of Pidyon Shvuyim, for the Svarim, and as well as the Chafetzim, as well as those objects of Kedusha, objects which were used by Tzaddikim, which also have a Kedusha, a holiness within them. But regardless, even all of us, everyone can help in the success of this matter, and that is, but when everybody gives some tzedakah or says a kapitel tilim, by a kapitel tilim, which we all say, it is helpful. Everybody through this way can contribute to the success of this matter. And especially that ultimately by helping out in this, everyone also goes into the category of being a mezakeh harabim, which means that all of these things are going to become accessible to the public. So it's by doing this, he's also being mezakeh harabim, he's bringing schus to the public. Later in the Farbrengen, as usual, the Rebbe referred to Rashi's in this week's Sedre. The Rebbe chose a few of them and explained them all in Parashat Shemos. Now we know when the Rebbe discusses the questions in the Rashi, these are questions which were raised in various periodicals and various ha'oras hatmimim which are published in the yeshivas, some here in Alatayra, some in Morristown and Montreal, and it's usually that the Rebbe chooses from these ha'oras hatmimim, chooses several questions in the weekly Seder and the Rashi and discusses it in the Farbrengen. First question which the Rebbe asked was in Kapitel Beis Pasuk Aleph, where the Pasuk explains Vayelach Ishme Beis Levi, somebody who was a descendant of the tribe of Levi, Vayikach es Bas Levi, and he married a daughter also who was a descendant of Levi. Now the Pasuk does not mention who it was, neither who the Ish was, neither who the Bas was. So the Pasuk doesn't say it. But we really know who it was. Where do we know it from? We know it from next week's Sedra, because here the Torah is telling about the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu. So we know that the Ish, the man, was Amram, and the mother was Yocheved. So why Rashi, who's learning the Psukim with us, why doesn't Rashi mention anything to tell us who the Ish is and who the Bas is? For the child who's learning Chumash, it's definitely important to know. The Rebbe says the answer to this is a very simple one. In Pashas Va'era, there the Torah is talking about the Yiches of Moshe Rabbeinu. So there, when the Torah discusses it, that's when the Torah mentions it. Here, what the Torah is really talking about is about how Paro wanted to destroy the Jewish infants. And as part of this story comes in the fact how Ishme Beis Levi married a woman who was a Bas Levi, and they gave birth to a child, and they had to hide the child, and the Torah goes on telling us that they hid the child. In other words, all of this came out as a result of what the Psukim talk here previously. Before that, how the Psukim explain that the decree of Paro, which was to destroy every boy that was born. So really, it's not important to know who the Ishme Beis Levi is, and it's not important to know who the Bas Levi is. What's important to know here in this inyan is that a baby was born, and for the first couple of months they were able to keep him, to hide the baby, because they weren't to worry it. As Rashi explains, that Yocheved gave birth, and later they had no alternative, so they went ahead and they hid the child. So this pasuk of Vayelach Ishme Beis Levi, Vayikach es Bas Levi, this pasuk is coming really as a hemshech, as a continuation to what is told before, and continues later with the same related inyanim, the fact how they were trying to circumvent, not to be affected by the Gezerah, by the decree of Paro. So there's no need really for Rashi here to tell us who the Ishme Beis Levi was or who the Bas Levi was. That's why Rashi doesn't mention it. Weiter, in Parshas Va'era, the Torah discusses the Yichus of Moshe Rabbeinu, so the Torah tells us who was Moshe's father and who was Moshe's mother, because there it's negaya to know. Interesting, when the Rebbe was talking about, I think it was earlier, when he was talking about Parshas Shemos, he mentioned that in general, Shemos, the Chumash Shemos is a Chumash of Geulah. This is Geulah. Previously in Parshas Chumash Bereishis, it was not Geulah. On the contrary, what does Vayechi end off with? With the passing away of Yosef. And Vayisem ba'orim b'Mitzrayim, he was put away in an orein, and in Mitzrayim he was stored. Vaita Chumash Vayikra has the title that it's the Chumash of Korbanos. Bamidbar is called Chumash HaPkudim, Chumash of counting. The Varim is a Mishnah Torah. Which Chumash is a Chumash which deals primarily with Geulah? That is the Chumash of Shemos. In fact, even though in this Sedra we don't have the Geulah in its actuality, but it's right away referred to. Because the Medrash says, Ve'elu Shmos B'nai Yisrael, these are the names of the tribes of B'nai Yisrael. But there's a Medrash says, Reuven Shimon Nachse, Reuven Shimon Salka. In other words, with the same names of Reuven and Shimon that they entered in Mitzrayim, these same names they came out of Mitzrayim with. In other words, famous Medrash which describes how the Yidden behaved in Mitzrayim, how they were able to hold out in Mitzrayim. And one of the things was Shalishinu Eshmam. They did not change their names. They did not adopt Mitzrisha names. So Mamela, the Medrash says that it was the same with the same names of Reuven and Shimon that they went down into Mitzrayim, with the same type of names that came out of Mitzrayim. So Mamela, right away at the beginning of the Sedra, we already right away have an indication on the union of Geulah. This is right away at the beginning of Shemos. Weiter, there's another question that's raised, which that is at the beginning of the Chazarah, where the pasuk says, "Vnei Yisrael paru, vayishchetzu, vayirbu, vayatzmu b'myod moi." That the Yidden multiplied, and they multiplied in a very forceful way, to the extent that the entire land, the entire country became full with them. So if we look into Rashi and this pasuk, Rashi says, Paru, Vayishretzu, Vayir. I'm sorry, the pasuk uses various expressions that describe how the Yidden multiplied. Rashi only finds it important to explain one of them. Which one is it? Vayishretzu. Vayishretzu, Rashi says what it means. What does Rashi explain the meaning of Vayishretzu? Shehayu yoldois shisha bekeres echad. That they multiplied in such a forceful way that a woman would give birth to 6 children at one time. So why? In other words, the question is, the pasuk here uses various expressions that describe how the Yidden multiplied. Why does Rashi only teach the Vayishretzu? What makes Rashi say that Vayishretzu means Shayil the Shisha Bekeres Echad? The other expressions Rashi ignores. Only this expression Rashi learns quotes and learns pshat in it and tells us what it means. Shayil the Shisha Bekeres Echad. Rabbi says again, this is a very simple explanation. Pasuk here uses various expressions. Yishchetzu, for the child who is learning Chumash, Yishchetzu reminds him of a sheretz, of an insect. So the question arises, how does an insect come into here? We're talking about how the Yidden multiplied when they were in Mitzrayim. So the pasuk kind of lends an expression which has to do with an insect with a sheretz. How does the sheretz fit in here? So that is why Rashi is telling us you should know that they gave birth similar to a sheretz. Just like shrotzim are multiplied in a very fast way, that they give birth to more than one at one time, up to the extent of giving birth to 6 at one time. The same here, they were yildei shisha bekeres echad. Rabbi says these are the questions which were raised in the Svarim. Another question which the Rebbe quoted is when the Rebbe is addressing Moshe Rabbeinu, and he's addressing him mitoich hasneh, from the bush. So Rashi says there, v'loi ilanacha. That is Pasuk Beis in Kapitel Gimel. There Rashi says v'loi ilan acha. Why didn't the Rebbe address him from another tree? Mishum ima yanoichi b'tzar. The Rebbe wanted to show that he's taking part in the tzaras of Yid. He's participating in the tzaras of Yid, and that is why he's revealing himself in a sneh, which is a burning bush. But what type of a burning bush? Such a bush does not give any fruit. It's not fruit bearing. So, in other words, it's something which does not. It's a tree, but does not represent an idea, a symbol of a pleasant tree. It does not express the idea of a fruitful tree, but it is a sneh. Being that Yidden were in a tzara at the time, so that is why the Rebbe revealed himself also from a sneh. So here is also a question. Where did the Rebbe talk to Moshe Rabbeinu? Rebbe spoke to him in the Midbar. What type of trees do you expect to find in a desert? All you find in a desert is a sneh. You can't find fruitful trees in a desert, and this is something which the child is well aware of. So why does Rashi make a whole issue that it was metoich hasneh v'lo ilon acha? Why not an ilon acha? Mishum ima yanoichi b'tzara, that the Rebbe is participating in the tzara of the Yidden. He met him in the Midbar. In the Midbar there are no fruitful trees in the Midbar. But answered this question, I don't offhand recall the teretz. Sorry. I don't recall. But these questions, if anybody remembers, please speak up. Please speak up. If I recall correctly, the Rebbe did bring out the point why it was mitoich hasneh. Pasuk stresses. Remember something? if I recall correctly, it is that the pasuk stresses mitoich hasne, from amidst the burning bush. If only because of the fact that the Rebbe met Moshe in the Midbar, and in the Midbar there are no fruitful trees, then he could have stood at the side of a snare and spoken to Moshe Rabbeinu. Yeah, this was the answer. Could have stood at the side of a snare, right near the snare, and that is where the Rebbe would speak to him. Being that we find that the pasuk stresses mitoich hasne, that the revelation of godliness was from amidst the snare, which is a burning bush which does not give any fruits. So that is why Rashi proves mitoich hasne v'lo yilo nacha mishum ima yanochi betzov. So these questions, the Rebbe says, these are questions which were raised and were mentioned. He's referring to. But there's a question which nobody asked. And he wants to know why. And this is also in the Psukim here, where the Pasuk says, Vayhi bayomim arabim haheim, Vayomas melech Mitzrayim. This is in Kapitel Beis, Pasuk Chav Gimel. That the king of Mitzrayim passed away. He died. Vayonchu b'nei Yisrael min ha'avoda. So the Yidden were sighing very deeply. Vayizokun, they were shouting. Vatal shavasam el alakim, and their shouting reached the Eibishter min ha'avoda. So what does Rashi say? Really, he didn't die. What happened? Nitztareya. He became sick with leprosy. V'haya shoichet enoikes Yisrael, and he would slaughter Jewish children. V'roichetz bedamam, and bathe in their blood. This is in Kapitel Beis, Pasuk Chav Gimel. The Rebbe says, question here is a very obvious one. Why does Rashi have to teach Vayomas Melech Mitzrayim, not that he really died, but that he turned sick, and they had to kill Jewish children, and he was bathing in their blood? Why get into this whole arichas and this whole lengthy explanation here? Learn Vayomas means very simple. Vayomas means that he died. Vayomas Melech Mitzrayim, and Vayonchu b'nei Yisrael min ha'avoda. And why doesn't that? This is a very simple question as we follow the Psukim. And this question, the Rebbe says, nobody found it important to ask. He says, why? So you're going to tell me that there's a commentary on Rashi who is called Rabbeinu Eliyahu Mizrahi, and he asks this question, and he asks this question, and he doesn't answer the question. So you're figuring, why should I ask a question that Rabbeinu Eliyahu Mizrahi asks, and he doesn't answer? There's no need in asking such a question. But the question is still a question, and the question requires to be answered. And it requires an answer. The Rebbe says he remembers that when he was in Cheder, he was a child, and came to a question, which obviously the Malamed, the Rebbe who was learning with the children, also didn't know what to answer the children. The usual answer would be, "Adu wirst älter werden, wirst du wissen." When you'll get older, you'll know. It's not important now. You'll leave it, you'll get older. But the Rebbe says this is not an acceptable excuse. This is a question which is a very obvious one in the pasuk, and we have to know the answer on this. And besides, what's happening? What does the pasuk say? Vayhi bayomim arabim haheim, that the Melech Mitzrayim died, and that is when the Yidden started sighing and screaming and complaining on the work. What happened until now? We learn until now how hard the Yidden were laboring. So obviously they were complaining and krechzing until now as well. So once Vayomas Melech Mitzrayim, that is when Vayonchu b'nei Yisrael min ha'avoda. Because of this question, Rashi has to learn that something happened here that made it yet worse for the Yidden. Made it worse for the Yidden. How bad it was till now, it became yet worse. Through the fact that Vayomas Melech Mitzrayim. So obviously, Vayomas Melech Mitzrayim, the Melech Mitzrayim is dying. How could this make it worse for the Yidden? Listen how the Rebbe is learning. So the Rebbe is learning Nitztareya. He was sick. Paroi. He had leprosy. And what Paroi needed was what we would call today a blood transfusion. But in those days, the medical standards were not like today, that they were able to give in blood by injecting blood into a person's body. So what would be the practice? A person who would be in need of blood, he would bathe in blood. And this is what Rashi is telling us. Nitztareya. And that's why Vayeshechet Neikes Yisrael v'Reichetz Bedam. So by him bathing in blood, this was supposed to be a medical cure for Pari. When Pari was sick, so that is why he did this, and this was supposed to cure him, and this was supposed to improve his health. So now we understand the answer to Rabbi Yoel Mizrahi's question. Why Rashi is forced to learn this way. Because otherwise there's a very strong question here. Why did it become worse for the Yidden once Parai died, worse than it was before that? So that's why Rashi tells us that really he didn't die. He came into a situation where he needed blood, and the only way, in the medical standards of those days, that they were able to help him with blood was by him bathing in blood. There was no union of transfusion through injections or other similar methods which we're aware of today. So that is why it had to be through what way? That he was roichetz b'damam, he was in the blood of children. Would bathe in the blood of children. These were the psukim which the Rebbe explained in today's Farbrengen. But mentioned again a very interesting vote. Explanation. It says in Zohar we have a lot of times the expression Posach. Pasach, this Tana, Pasach, another Tana. Pasach means he opened. He opened and he would begin to say so and so. So in Chassidus it's explained, what's the Pshat Pasach? Pasach means he opened, he made the opening for this type of an interpretation. Until now, this revelation in Torah was not here in the world yet. Once this Tana said it, this type of a Pshat was introduced into the world of Torah in this world. With this introduction, the Rebbe explained that there's a story related regarding the Alshich. Alshich was a big tzaddik and a big goyen. The Alshich once said a perush, explained an Inyan in Torah. And later he found out that a very simple person said a similar perush to what he said. So it bothered him. He felt bad. He was aware of his own madrege. He was aware of his own level. And Mele, he felt kind of down that he felt that he introduced this Perush and Torah, and here he hears a short while later that a very simple person, a very simple Jew, came along and said something along the same lines as what he said. So it was explained to him from heaven that he shouldn't have any chlishas hadas, he shouldn't have any weakening in his mind, he shouldn't feel bad about it. Why? Once he introduced this pshat, he was taka the first one to introduce this Perush and learning. Once he introduced it, then already this Perush is in the world of Torah here lamata. Once the Perush has already been introduced by somebody, and in this particular case it was he was fortunate to introduce this particular Perush. Once it was already introduced, then others who may be in a much, much lower madrega than him in learning can already follow the same path and develop it and go further in it. However, the main credit goes to the one who introduces this Perush, to the one who's Pesayach, who's opening this door. And being that he was the one who was Pesayach, he was the one that opened, it is his credit. And once it was already open, it already becomes much easier for other people that can be at much, much lower madregas, much simpler madregas, that they can go ahead and develop this thought and go and elaborate on it further and go deeper into it. But when could they only do it? Once it was already introduced by somebody like the Alshich or somebody of a similar level and so forth. At the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe again brought out special days which we have this week, that this is the day of the Rambam's Yortzeit, and also the Yortzeit of the Alter Rebbe. And the Rebbe mentioned that regarding the Rambam, we know his name was Moshe. And the famous saying goes, Mi Moshe ad Moshe lekam ke Moshe. There is nobody as great between the two Moshes, from Moshe Rabbeinu until Moshe ben Maimon, from Moshe ben Amram until Moshe ben Maimon, there was nobody as great. And regarding the Alter Rebbe's name was Shneur Zalman. So it was explained by Reb Nachum of Chernobyl that what is the name of the Alter Rebbe Shneur? Shnei Oyer. It's composed of the Alter Rebbe in his life. The Alter Rebbe represented two illuminations, a double illumination. The illumination of Nigla de Torah. He illuminated the world with his Nigla, and he illuminated the world with his Chasidus. So again, in other words, the Alter Rebbe was also outstanding in both parts of Torah. Shnei Oyer. Torah is Oyer. Ne'er mitzvah, the Torah Oyer. So when we're talking about Oyer, about illumination, we're referring to Torah. Torah is Lichtigkeit. What was the Alter Rebbe? The Alter Rebbe was Shnei Oyer. And together with it, his name was Zalman. If we were to take the letters of Zalman, we want to spell the word Zalman, and we want to spell the word Lizman, it's the same letters. Same letters spell Zalman, and the same letters spell Lizman. Was meint Lizman? Lizman means time. In other words, what was the greatness of the Alter Rebbe? That how great he was in learning. And he was great, Shnei Oyer, a double Lichtigkeit. Lichtigkeit Nigle and a Lichtigkeit Chassidus. And what was he successful doing? He was successful to bring it down into Zman. In other words, to bring it down that it should be accessible by everyone. Zman, explain the Chassidus at length, that Zman is a nivra. Zman is time is something which was also created by the Rebishter. In other words, it's the limitation of the world. In the ramification of world and its limitations and its boundaries and so forth, into this world, this is where the Alter Rebbe introduced the Shnei Oyer. Not that it remains somewhere l'mayla and people we hear don't have any access to it. This was not the intention of the Alter Rebbe. What did he want? Shnei Oyer, take a double illumination, doubly Nigla and Chassidus, and where did he bring it down to? He brought all of this down into Lizman, into Zman, into this world, so that every Yid should be able to have a shaykhus to it.